I'm passionate about helping to shift the paradigm that we parent from power over our children and kind of more authoritarian style of understanding children to more power with our children, understanding what's going on for them, as opposed to seeing their behavior as just attention seeking. And I really like to think of that as connection seeking.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Motherhood Made Magic podcast. Today I am speaking with Shelley Clarke. Shelley lives in Adelaide with her husband and 3 children. She works as a physio and craniosacral therapist in her clinic in Seacliff. She is also an aware parenting and hand-in-hand parenting instructor and loves supporting parents through in-person and online workshops. She is passionate about helping families navigate the everyday challenges of life and loves supporting others to know themselves more deeply. Welcome, Shelley.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It is so nice to have you here. I've seen a few of your online workshops and I really wanted the opportunity to share some of your wonderful wisdom with our listeners here. So I know you have plenty of different skills. I'd just love you to give yourself a bit more of an intro or a bit more background on yourself before we dive into some questions.
Yeah, sure. I'm Shelley, as you said. I live in Adelaide. So I suppose my journey, like I've been a physio now for 15 or 16 years. And then over that time, I've worked in many different areas, including pediatrics at the Women's and Children's Hospital here in Adelaide. So I've always loved kids. And then when I had my own children, like many, and that's why I love your work so much, is I really struggled with that transition. First child, post-traumatic kind of birth, post-traumatic, postnatal anxiety and things like that. And I was sort of my first friend. None of my friends had really had kids. So I was one of the first to have kids. And yeah, I really kind of struggled with that transition. And so it led me down a path of finding out more about myself. I came across craniosacral therapy, which is a really light touch manual therapy approach, which is wonderful for kids and babies and all the way up to the elderly. And that really helped me process the birth trauma that we went through. It helped me with anxiety, and I just saw such profound changes in me with this therapy that I then went to study it. So that's sort of how that started. And I've been studying craniosacral therapy now for 6 years, and I work predominantly with kids and babies, children, as well as parents and mothers and things during pregnancy. So I love that side of my work, and that just brings me so much joy seeing the changes. I also took my children actually as well to have craniosacral therapy when they were kids, and I saw huge changes in them.
What kind of changes did you notice? Like I've had craniosacral therapy myself as a supportive practice through pregnancy and just in general life. But what sort of things do you see in your own children or in your pediatric patients?
Mainly in my own children. So I took my son in when he was 2, just before he was 2, and he's 8 now. So he wasn't really talking. He had a von Toos delivery. So it's quite a traumatic kind of stretch to their heads when they come out, and quite a lot of force. And so, he wasn't talking, and I took him in to see therapists that I see, and within a few sessions he'd started to string some sentences together. It opened up some neural pathways, it shifted some tension in his head and in his body, and his development just skyrocketed after that. So, sometimes the tension that we hold in our bodies from birth can really impact development. So I will see in children that come and see me, they might start to crawl or sit up or walk. There will be some sort of developmental milestone that happens often after having some sessions. His language and speech and language really improved. The other thing that I see a lot of is children with sensory processing difficulties And so those things will settle down after some sessions. So sensitivity to tags or like clothes or noise. So really it helps to calm our nervous system down. And so, yeah, I just find often my children, I know when they need a session because they're just a little bit more heightened in their bodies and in their nervous system. And that's a really nice way to calm, to help that be able to shift down a gear.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. For the people who maybe don't know what that kind of therapy looks like, what does a session involve? How do you position or touch the child?
Yeah. So it looks different for every kid that comes in, but they don't need to lay down. So if an adult comes in, if you came in, I would lay you on the table, fully clothed. We could work through through clothing. So it's really comfortable. Often there's a blanket, and adults will lay still for the hour. And so you'll lay still for the hour. And often parents will say, oh, I can't bring my kid because they won't sit still. And I said, often we are playing on the floor and the kids are playing with blocks, and I might be treating them on the floor. We lay in a beanbag, or they lay in a beanbag, and I just sit next to the beanbag. And so with kids, it's very varied. They don't have to lay still for the whole time. Again, they remain fully clothed, and treatment really is my hands laying on their body. So it might start on their feet or through their hips and through their belly or up through their chest and their head. So just placing my hands on different areas of their body, and it is really, really gentle. So in children, it's like 5 grams of pressure, or even less actually. Yeah, it's a really gentle modality, and we're often working with the fascia in the body, so the connective tissue that surrounds all of our muscles and joints and bones, and we're working with that with a really light touch. And over a sustained period of time, we feel changes in the fascia.
From my background in exercise physiology, sometimes when we talk about fascia, it's thinking about a stocking that all the muscles and the other tissues kind of live within. Or the areas of stockings are meant to slide past one another. And sometimes when they stop moving and flowing so freely, there can be little adhesions, or what people might feel as knots or pressure points, for example.
Tension.
So a rough way of doing that people might have seen done at the gym or whatever might be like using a foam roller, but you're using different techniques that are literally like 5 grams of pressure on the child's skin to release some of those stuck points and allow the tension to be able to be moved through their body. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And it does. And I often explain it, and this is how it gets explained as we're learning as well, as imagine like our t-shirt. So if you've got a nice flowy t-shirt on your body, and imagine, like you said, fascia is surrounding every muscle, but every organ, even within muscles. It's a multi 3D complex connective tissue. It's what holds us together. So it's got elastic properties, so it can stretch and move, but it's also got contractile properties too, so it can kind of tighten up a little bit, like you said, those sort of adhesions. So if you imagine a t-shirt, say over a course of a lifetime, every kind of little injury or bump or scrape or, can create a bit of tension in an area. So you might sort of hold that t-shirt tight at your hip because you got a sore hip from an injury. Maybe you sat a lot when you were studying, and so you've got some tension up through your neck and your upper back posturally. But then we get these lines of tension that form throughout our body. So if we kind of scrunch the t-shirt, I'm doing it knowing that no one can actually see me here, but if you imagine this kind of areas in your body slowly start to become tight, we get these tension patterns form. And often what we're working on is shifting and creating more space in those areas, so then the body can do what it naturally does and function at a more optimal way, really. So even in babies, if you think about how tightly packed they are in utero, they can come out into this world with tension patterns already. And so, you know, my son, when he was born, he must have been kind of packed a little tightly, wedged into my pelvis, and like had a bit of a sore neck, like his neck was sort of looking one way. And that's really a tension pattern through his fascia. So he had a treatment the day after he was born. And then we could really notice that he was able to turn his head both ways. So yeah, even babies and kids, as you know, quite early on, can have these kind of tension, you know, these fascial tensions in their body. And that's what we work on.
So interesting. So how does this relate then to the other parenting instructor and support paradigms that you have come to learn about and practice?
Alongside studying the nervous system and craniosacral therapy, I had one kid and then I had another one, my daughter, and I was going through the same things most parents do: lack of sleep, adrenal fatigue, burnout. You know, my daughter wasn't sleeping. My son, when my daughter came along, he was, you know, doing some undesirable kind of behaviors, like hitting his sister, and we were a bit lost as to how to manage that and what was going on for him. And I think one night I stumbled across, I think I Googled like gentle sleep solutions or something, and came across Hand in Hand Parenting and loved it. I read it. It made sense. It made sense with, you know, in craniosacral therapy, we also talk a lot about emotional release, or somato-emotional release is a part of the work where emotions are stored in the body. And sometimes when we're working on the body, people will start to cry in the session or have like an emotional release. And so when I was learning around about Hand in Hand and aware parenting, about allowing our children to have their feelings and listening to their feelings, it really married with what I was learning about the nervous system. And so I've sort of gone down two paths really, and now I bring them together with supporting parents from the bodywork side of things, but also in educating parents and to have that understanding of what's going on for their child, because all behavior is a form of communication. If we look at it like that, then what is the needs underneath their behavior, what's going on for them in their nervous system, and how can we meet them, and how can we listen, and how can we allow them to have their full range of their feelings. And yes, the last 5 years I've really been studying all of those things, and I think they marry really, really well. And a lot of the reading was the same for both.
Yeah, I love it. And that point that you made really speaks to me. I try and keep the mantra, I don't think I picked this one up from you, but it's that our children aren't trying to give us a hard time, they're having a hard time.
Yeah, absolutely.
If all
and
behavior is communication.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've now read many different parenting and I kind of parenting books and philosophies, and also including in like psychotherapy and understanding human psychology, and bringing this all together. Certainly, I'm passionate about helping parents helping to shift the paradigm that we parent from. And I know you, with your work around supporting mothers and shifting a lot of the birthing world and the postnatal support and all of those things, is a part of shifting this paradigm from power over our children and kind of more authoritarian style of understanding children to a more power with our children, understanding what's going on for them, as opposed to seeing their behavior as, you know, we might in the past have heard the saying like, oh, they're just, you know, if a child's climbing up the walls and, you know, misbehaving, so to speak, that they're just attention seeking. And I really like to think of that as that it's connection seeking. And so a lot of my work with parents is helping them to break down some of these old school thinking and old school paradigm of working from, and really seeing that their children, you know, connection and relationship, that fundamental aspect of human relationship, and how can we parent from that paradigm.
Where I live, we've just had 5 days or so of very heavy rain. And I know that doesn't sound like a long time to be stuck inside compared to the people who have been in lockdown for much of the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But that idea of climbing the walls does seem quite familiar at this point in time. So what could our children be trying to tell us, or how would you, from either aware parenting or hand-in-hand parenting approaches, deal with a situation where it does just seem like our kids are being what we would perceive as totally irrational?
Yeah, there can be a few things going on there. You know, when we're stuck inside, like we do need to move, as you know, being an exercise physiologist, movement is important for us, and being out in fresh air and nature and all those things are really important for, you know, for us to feel better. And so when we are stuck inside, as many of us know, for the last, you know, we've been really lucky here in Adelaide, actually, you know, in terms of COVID lockdowns and things, but there's been so many around the world that have been stuck inside or really confined to spaces, and it can be really, really hard. You know, obviously those things are really important to get, and to acknowledge that, yes, it's a big change to their everyday routines and not being able to go outside and things. But the other thing that can sometimes happen with being stuck inside, and I know I have it too with my kids, is that, you know, on those really slow days where you can't go anywhere, or you don't have anywhere to go, and, you know, it feels like the kids are just like, it's really emotional. There's lots of sort of behavioral things going on. It might be loud and everyone's going there's a bit of chaos. In aware parenting, we talk about like having our control patterns, or the things that we do to suppress our feelings, or to avoid our feelings, or to bury them. And adults have them. We all have things that we do. We develop these things, or these ways of protecting ourselves or distracting ourselves from our feelings. And one of those ways can be movement, like it can actually be movement. And one of those ways is like by being really busy. And so when we take away those things, or when we're forced to kind of sit still or be like, as in when I mean sit still, I mean be inside, all of these feelings can come up. And so parents can kind of be a bit like, whoa, what's going on? But actually our children are really, really smart. They know what they need. And sometimes they'll use an opportunity where everyone's confined to be like, oh, great, mum and dad are here, or mum's here. We can't go anywhere today. I'm going to let you know how I'm feeling, and I'm going to let all these feelings out. It can be hard, I know, when we're stuck inside, and we often will think, oh, we just need to get outside and we just need to go and burn off those feelings or burn off that energy, which is a part of it. But at the same time, sometimes that can be a way to distract our kids and to keep them moving. When we are stuck inside with rainy days, it can feel really big. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it also tends to why perhaps time with devices and screens can seem to worsen rather than help the situation on those days at times.
Yeah. Yep.
One spoke to me there was about needing to sit still, and how much that might relate to the way that children at age 5, 6, 7, 8 years old are asked to sit in a classroom. Can you speak a little bit to the ways that might play out when we get our children home from school?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things with that. And I suppose the way I see things is always in different lenses. So I kind of put my therapy lens on with the nervous system and what's going on for them and how they process. So that's always my first, one lens. And then I'll be look at what's going on for them from a feelings and a needs perspective. And so, if we think about at school, if they find it really hard to sit still and are needing to move around, sometimes kids actually need some sort of movement to be able to process what's going on in the environment, or even to be able to listen to the teacher. they find it easier if they're fiddling with something, they are able to still actually listen and learn, and that's how they can process information the best. I certainly find that I'm always doodling or like drawing, or, you know, if I was at lectures throughout my life, I've always been able to fiddle with my hands, and then I can actually concentrate better. And so if in a classroom, if we don't necessarily understand that, and we're asking children to sit still all the time, if they're not having enough chance to move, then they're using up so much energy to, you know, comply to all the rules, to listen, to learn. You know, it's exhausting. And then when we pick them up from school, we are often their safe place, and it all comes exploding out like a big volcano. That's similar to, like you were saying before, with the being at home for 5 days is effectively the same sort of thing. You know, often we're really, really busy, and then we have a period at home when we're not doing much, and it all can kind of come out. So, you know, the after school transition to home can be really hard, and you can see these, you know, your children might get home, and like I can see it really quickly with my kids now. If my son gets in the car and starts to yell and like, how's your day, and he screams back at me like, yeah, fine, I'm like, oh, okay. So it gives me an indication of what's bubbling underneath the surface, and they hold it together until it all comes out. And so if parents can understand what's happening and can listen and can be there for them to offload those feelings and to just hold that safe space for them, often they might have a big cry, or they might get a bit angry, or whatever it is that is going on for them. If parents can hold that space, and then it will often pass, it'll move through them, and then you can see they come back online, they come back into balance, they then they then are back into themselves, and they will go off and play with their siblings, or they'll, you know, go and play quite well after that. So certainly that's something that is really common, and it's really common with the parents that I work with too, is helping them to understand that that's what's going on for their children.
Yeah, right. So instead of brushing off don't be silly, that time's over, going, okay, we need some decompress time, and then we'll get back into whatever the rest of the day is going to look like.
Yeah. If you imagine it, we often as adults do the same thing. You know, if we've had a really busy day, maybe a work meeting didn't go quite as well as we'd hoped, or something happened, we got an email that was a bit upsetting, we kind of hold all these things together until we get to a point where it will bubble out. Now, sometimes that might come out in a way where it's a bit of an argument with our partner, or but actually underneath is like the build up of our day, or even our week or months, or however long. So if our children are doing small things, or if they seem to be having a meltdown over or crying over the fact we've given them a banana for after school snack, or my kids, you know, I've peeled the banana the wrong way, and then they have a huge cry. If we can sit with them through that, if we can try not to brush that off, we can really, you know, it's quite easy as parents, and I suppose that's the old paradigm of saying, don't be silly, it's just a banana, or you'll be okay, up you go, come on, move along. And we don't create space for those feelings. Those feelings end up sort of buried in our bodies, and that creates that tension, and you know, that increased tension in their nervous system, in their bodies. So yeah, like you said, allowing space for that decompression. I actually feel like the first 4 or 5 days of every school holidays, or first maybe weekend, 3 or 4 days of school holidays, I purposely don't go anywhere. I purposely keep it free, almost like your forced rain break of a few days where we don't do much. Now, I almost have to write myself a reminder to say this is going to be, you know, explosive, and like there's a whole lot of stuff, but it's easy to distract them and go and plan all these things to keep everyone busy. But then when do our kids ever get a chance to really kind of fully decompress? So having these spaces of nothing on is really helpful. And if you do have stuff on, like you're saying, routine and things like that, once they've had that big release and had a cry and you've listened, you can then get back into the routine of going to the park and running around, and because those things are all important. But I think having space to listen to their feelings is one thing I talk a lot about with parents.
Yeah. And when you say listening to their feelings or being at home for a few days, it's not like you're doing nothing and sitting there silently the whole time. No. What does that time look like, and how do you build in attachment play, which is something, a big thing that I've learnt from you, whether that's in just a one-off after school setting or in that first weekend of school holidays? How do you play this out in your family?
Yeah, sure. There's a few different things. And really, like, attachment play is one of the cornerstones of aware parenting. And then in hand parenting, they call it play listening. And it's one of the 5 tools that they teach in hand. So hand in hand, they have 5 kind of tools with the kids that we teach. And so play listening and attachment play are really, really similar. And I will build that in knowing that, so say I'll give some examples because it's easier. So for my son and my daughter after school, I will try and make sure that I purposely and intentionally reconnect with them after school. It can be really easy to pick them up, come home, okay, and then I start cooking dinner and they're off, and then all of a sudden they're fighting and we wonder why our kids are then squabbling. You know, they're trying to process the feelings from the day on each other because I'm kind of off doing my own thing. So for me, I always, try and spend the first 20 minutes or so after school with my attention on them. And it might be we get home, and I'll say, hey, do you want to play a game? Or which might be like jumping on the trampoline together, and it ends up being a bit of roughhousing where they, might wrestle me down to the ground, and it's kind of shifting that tension, allowing those feelings to come out and to, like I was saying before, that space for them. So effectively it starts off with a bit of there's lots of growling and voice, which helps them to shift it. Lots of body contact, which helps them again to kind of, move any feelings. And then sometimes they will actually bump their foot, or you might find that they get hurt and there's a lot of tears come up. And we think, oh, that wasn't a very big bump. Come on, you'll be right. But actually the closeness and the connection and your presence in whatever game that you're playing helps them to have that safe space and that safety for those feelings to come up to be heard. So for me, like my son loves to roughhouse, so there might be some roughhousing, which is kind of where I might be on all fours and he jumps on me, pretends to kind of wrestle me down to the ground. My daughter, it might be something like playing schools, role playing, what's happened throughout the day. We also sometimes might just do something like some chasey games outside where it's Red Rover all over or Stuck in the Mud or something, where it's just the first 10 or 15 minutes is kind of me giving them my attention. And I find that is a really good way of getting on top of or being there to avoid the sibling fights and to avoid those feelings coming out later on when towards another sibling or towards you or whatever that is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I can see as well how this might relate to so I only have one child and she's younger. She's just about to turn 2, and we went to a trampoline park on the weekend. That was one of the things we did while everywhere else was raining. She was one of probably the smallest there on all the equipment, and she was getting bumped over, and I was right with her. I could help her up if she needed help and all of those things, but afterwards she was just wired. And yes, it was exciting and it was noisy and all those things, but I could see that she'd just been bumped over so many times and was sick of being the little one bumped over. Before she was able to settle down that afternoon and that evening, we played a game where we were crawling around on the bed on the big mattress, and I stayed on my knees rather than standing up on my feet, and I just got her to try with all her might to try and push me over. And she'd push, and eventually I'd collapse and fall down. And then she'd climb on top of me and laugh, and then we'd do the same thing again. And she had to push harder and harder. And it was just like a case of that she was the one who was strong. She was in charge for a while.
Yes. In one of the attachment play, so in Aletha Salter's book, Attachment Play, there's 9 different types of attachment play. Rough housing's one, which we just talked about. But one of the other ones is power reversal games. So when our children get to be the more powerful role, is really helpful for them to process feelings when they may have felt powerless. And so her at the trampoline, being bumped around, the smallest one, it can feel really powerless, and she's small. And so what you did then was amazing in helping her to be in that more powerful role. It helps our children to feel their power, to know like how, strong they are. But it also the laughter. So whenever we are playing with our children, we want to follow the giggles or follow the laughter. If she pushed you and knocked you over, and I would even I encourage this with parents. I'm like, even if they you can play these games where they might just blow you over with their blow you over with their voice, and you fall backwards and they laugh and laugh and laugh because they have, knocked you over. The laughter is helping to process it's another form of emotional release is laughter. And that's helping to process those feelings or counteract those feelings of powerlessness. So power reversal games, I think, have been so life-changing in our family. Really, I would encourage, parents to have a go at basically to start it. If it's something you've never done before and you want to start it, you will say to your child, hey, let's play a game. Or like you did, you just get down on the floor, on the mat, and you say, okay, let's play a wrestling game, or let's play a game. What do you want to do? And you follow their lead. Non-directed child-centered play, when you're following their lead. And so she might kind of start to push you over, or you might need to suggest it to start with, but then you as a parent take on that less powerful role. So you'd be the one falling over. You could have been the one bumbling around the trampoline being knocked over by her, and she would just think that's hilarious. And this is how we can help our children to process their day and their week and what's happened to them with play. And it's really, really powerful.
It is just changes the whole dynamic to have these things in your toolkit.
Yes, it really does. So, I think we talked about teeth brushing in one of my things you watched. And I remember you saying teeth brushing has really changed. I'd love to hear more about how that, what you did with that and how that's changed. But even just simply, they get to brush your teeth and you don't like it. So if you're taking on that least powerful role, you actually would play up what they would be feeling. So is sometimes as parents, when we sit down and play with our kids, we want to kind of teach them, we want to go, oh, let's be brave. And so we pretend to be brave, or which, it doesn't really work as well as if you take on that powerful role and you actually ham up and play up being scared or being worried or not liking having your teeth brushed, or, if you play up what they would be feeling, it gives them the understanding that, oh, mum and dad get me. Mum and dad understand how this feels for me. And then they laugh and giggle, and it's really that connection. That's what we're looking for, is that kind of that understanding and attunement to what's going on for them. And it can shift really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And with my experience of the toothbrushing, a lot of toothpaste ended up all over my face, but it certainly made it a much more...
Yeah.
Teeth actually get brushed every day. There are no tears involved. So It's a big change.
Yeah. So it's those things as parents that we're dreading. So, if we're dreading picking up our children from school, if we're kind of a bit anxious or dreading the teeth brushing, oh, here we go, here's another battle. Any of those those points throughout the day, like seeing if you can bring in some play, and things can shift really quickly. So she gets to brush your teeth and put toothpaste all over. Yes, you have to wipe off the toothpaste, but it meant that there's laughter, there's no power over. You know, we could power over our kids is where we're forcing them to clean their teeth, where we might be using kind of threats or punishments. And there's no judgment. Like there's no judgment if we've done these things, because we've all done them. I've done them to my kids. But like it's about recognizing that those things don't necessarily feel great for us afterwards as parents, because we've kind of enforced that kind of power over our kids. And so play and laughter really is a way that we can do it with our kids and with connection. And it feels so much better as a parent. You come out of it and you go, oh, that wasn't like a struggle, it wasn't a battle. And, you know, there's much more joy and laughter for everyone when we can bring in some attachment play in some of these scenarios.
And so I think so far we've only touched on 3 of the 9 different types of attachment play. There is so much that there is to know and that we could learn from you. What I would love to know is where we can find you if we want to learn more about any of the things that you've spoken about, find out about all the other types of attachment play and listening play, more about what you do. Where can we locate you, Shelley?
Yeah, great. So on Facebook, Shelley Clarke Mind Body Parenting is my Facebook page, and on there there's a heap of free stuff actually, in terms of little video lives and things explaining more about all the different paradigms all the different lenses and things. So you can go and have a look there. I also have a course called 21 Days of Play, which I will actually probably be looking to run soon, probably when this podcast comes out actually. So starting in around May, I'll look to, for second term of school, run the 21 Days of Play, which is a little play idea every day for 21 days. And so we cover basically all of the 9 types of attachment play, and then we go through things to do for getting our kids into car seats, things to do for helping our kids get dressed in the morning, things to do for dinner, meals, you know, sibling squabbles, all of that sort of stuff. So I love running that course. So that's a really good one. And then I also have my website, shelleyclarke.com, for one-to-one sessions that I do with parents, which can be over Zoom or in person. So there's more information on my website as well.
Thank you, Shelley. I'll make sure that all of those links go into the show notes for our listeners. And just loved having you on today. Wanted to say a big thank you, because I know that all this information is going to ripple out.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I think sometimes every time I do a little podcast or talk, I think, and I get a message from a parent. So I would love if parents message me and say, oh my God, I heard you on here and I tried this one thing and now, you know, bedtime's so much easier. And I really honestly love hearing those stories, because that's why I do this work, is for the kids, is for, you know, making it easier for parents, and for parents to feel that joy in their parenting, as opposed to it feeling hard and like a struggle all the time. So yes, would love to hear if people have had any success stories. Message me, because that's why we do this work, is to change kind of one thing at a time in a family. And that just brings me so much joy.
I hope you loved listening to this episode as much as I loved recording it. If you want to find out more about what I do, you can head to my website, www.annacusack.com.au. Find my book, Mama, You're Not Broken, Unmasking the Unspoken Emotions of Modern Motherhood, on Amazon. Find me on Facebook at Anna Cusack, Complete Mama Support, or follow me on Instagram at annacusack postpartum. Please remember to hit subscribe on this podcast and give it a 5-star rating if you feel called. See you next time.